bounced around a bit trying to get this meeting, but I think this time
Yeah,
is
yeah, we
perfect
did.
right now.
Definitely we did. But I also, the interesting thing is this series has so ballooned beyond what I thought it was going to be. I mean, I've probably got, well, when Connie and I first envisioned it, we thought that there might be 40, 45 at the most, probably 30, Connie was thinking. Right. And now I've got probably close to 100 people have, are confirmed participants. I've interviewed probably 45 of them already, or not interviewed, but had conversations. Yeah. And so Connie she only audio or video edits maybe one a week. And so there's this
backlog.
There's enormous backlog, and I'm going to audio edit quite a few of them. I anticipate by the end of the year, I'll probably have 30 or maybe more audio edited, and then I'll post those as a podcast. And then Connie will continue to do whichever ones she wants to do, because she's got sort of a different purpose. She's imagining just creating videos, because she spends a day to 3 days adding text overlays and all this kind of stuff. And she wants it for institutions that want to have study, like a course kind of thing, a discussion course. So at any rate, bottom line is I don't know how long it'll be before I go live with this, but it probably won't be it'll probably be by the end of the year, because I'm imagining uploading a whole bunch of them by then. All
right, no worries. Sounds good.
Cool. All right, so obviously this will be edited, so anything, if you stumble, just say it, start at the top of the sentence. If for some reason occasionally there's like one of us freezes, bandwidth issues or something, so if that happens, if it happens to me and you notice it, just let me know, and then I'll start at the top. Good. Same thing. And any dumb and, all this stuff right now will be edited out. Any dumb and stupid stuff we say will be edited out, so. All right, so hang on, let me just take a breath, and then I'll welcome you, and then we'll just take it from there. Well, Guy, it's great to see you again, brother. It's been, what, 6 or 7 months probably since we've spoken on Zoom, or maybe longer than that. I forget when it was. It was within the last year.
Yeah, well, we had an original conversation in around August 2016. And,
okay.
Not sure what we've done since then. But,
no, it can't possibly be that long.
I can't remember.
Because it seems to be last year, last spring or summer. At any rate, it doesn't matter. But I just am grateful that you are able to be part of this post Doom series.
Thank you.
And I've valued your work, and now we get to discuss sort of how you think about and feel about, and how you came to think and feel about our times, and what seems to be unfolding. And then how do you stay inspired and on purpose in the face of some challenging stuff, some sobering stuff.
Yeah.
So,
good.
Yeah. So before we get actually into the questions that I've been asking the various guests, I just want to allow you to share, and don't be bashful, help us get you, like people who aren't familiar with your work. Help us understand what you're passionate about, what you're known for, and particularly proud of. And then also what are you particularly concerned about or involved in these days?
Sure. Thank you. I've got some web pages set up ready to go. If I can share the screen, is that going to be all right if I share the screen periodically?
I haven't done that on any of these calls, but I suspect you probably can. I'm imagining that it'll probably be recorded. So let's give it a shot.
Okay. So my story really goes back to my 20s when I was working. I got a job when I was about 23 in the offshore oil exploration industry. I was just a regular guy before that. Didn't know anything much about anything. But one thing that struck me in working in that industry was it was a great job. We got to travel around the world. The money was okay. And everywhere we went, we trashed the place. And so one of my first trip was to Taiwan on this oil exploration ship called Karen Bravo. And Taiwan, this is back in 1993 or something.
Okay.
It was a hellhole. I mean, it was just a wasteland, an industrial wasteland.
Wow.
And anyway, but as we were leaving Taiwan after 6 weeks, I was standing on the bow of the boat. The island was about 10 miles away. And I was just looking dreamily into the ocean as the boat headed towards Singapore. And it was one plastic bag after the other drifting past the vessel. And this is nearly 35 years ago. Okay. And this was 10 miles off the coast. This wasn't like next to the coast.
Right.
And so that, for me, that's really stuck in my head as one of these sort of instances where I had an awakening that I refer to as ecophany, as an ecological epiphany.
Yeah.
And so that was really the first. And from there, you know, and I could tell a whole story about the stuff that we did in the oil industry. You know, we dropped 400 liters of hydraulic fluid into the sea off the coast of Singapore. We dropped engine blocks over the side off Seychelles. And one time we drove a 900-ton oil ship and dragged all of the streamer cable and the air guns through a coral reef off the coast of Indonesia. And what was surprising to me was nobody ever got in trouble. It wasn't even logged. You know, it wasn't even noted anywhere. By the way, we just ruined your coral reef. Yeah. Anyway, so that was sort of the beginning of my awakening. And from there, I went on to do an environmental science degree.
What year or years were those?
1999 is when I completed my environmental science degree. So I think I started in the oil industry around 93.
Okay.
I was there for 2 years, then came and did this studies over 4 or 5 years. So with an environmental science degree, I learned this idea of the paradigm shift. The idea of a paradigm, if like being a system that you need to shift from one system to the other. And so I left university looking for a job in the newspaper, a paradigm shifter, no experience required, big bucks. Couldn't find anything quite like that. So I worked in environmental consulting for a few years. And then on the 2nd of November 2000, I had the second of my kind of epiphanies, if you like, which is when I was listening to Paul Hawken in Townsville doing a presentation on natural capital. And I found for the first time a model that you could actually see the paradigm shift, because environmental consulting was really about working within the existing paradigm and just mopping up the mess of development. And so pretty much I was electrified in that auditorium listening to Paul Hawken, and I've really been on a sort of a bender ever since for the last nearly 20 years of just—
Hey, if you got to go on a bender, that sounds like a good one to me.
Yeah, and so I've sort of dived in deep and I've gone broad, and I've done entrepreneurial ventures trying to bring all of these eco-sustainable ideas into little business ideas. My Myers-Briggs indicator type is INTP, and so
wait, INTP. Okay, great. Yep.
yeah,
I'm an EN FP or FJ. I'm an ENFJ. Yeah.
Well, you're definitely an E. I know that.
Yeah, right.
Extrovert.
Although interestingly, I'm almost barely over the edge. I have a pretty strong introverted side that a lot of people don't realize.
Okay. So for me, I'd be happy to spend a week on my own, which is why I come to write books, right?
Yes.
Do that. And if you put me on a stage or give me half a bottle of red in a party and I'm sort of get to talk about my subject, then the E starts to come out in a big way. So I've got the both, right?
Yeah.
So how did I get onto that? Except to say that, so when I get something in my mind, I drill down really quickly. And so I developed a sort of broad sort of, body of knowledge. And also as an Aries, I've got this sort of part of my character wants to sort of chart my own path. And so I like to find my way through these ideas and hobble new things together. I like creating new things. And somebody put it once that a good manager is somebody that, identifies what hasn't been done. And so I'm always looking for the things that haven't been done, trying to fill the gap as best I can. Never had a lot of resources at my disposal, so I've always tried to develop my skills as best I can. So I build my own websites and I do my own video production. I kind of try to do everything myself until such time as lashings of hot resources come available, then you can farm it out and I can spend more time just dreaming up new things. So I like building things, but I'm not particularly adept at running things. So theoretically, I'd come up with an idea, build it, and then hand it over for somebody else to run. Great. But so after Paul Hawken, I set out my own little enterprise called CO2, SEAO2, and that was sort of a sustainability advisory. And I was operating out of Townsville, North Queensland, which is quite extraordinary in a really rednecky sort of part of the world. But back in those days, there was the flavor. We helped to create a thing called Sustainable Townsville, which is a sort of a citywide sustainability program. And anyway, so I built up this business and it was doing really well in 2008, but the global financial crisis basically killed off all of the cash flow that I was relying on for my business. Sure. I floundered for a few years and subsequently went off and started writing. So I started writing fiction novels. The first one took around 2 years, I guess. So that's just been something that I've done intermittently. But more, I just sort of jumped forward to some sort of more relevant stuff. But I ended up in Brisbane, which is where I did my degree in the first place, and I've nearly completed a Master of Business. And in that time, I've been writing a whole bunch more novels, and I've sort of got to the point where I can smash out the first draft of a novel in about 30 days, about 45,000 words. And then after 2 or 3 editing passes, it sort of more or less passes as a novel. So I was at a market stall in a place called Yamundi in Sunshine Coast, and I was having these conversations. I was selling these little icons that I'd created that had this sort of environmental themes, and I was talking to people about sustainability, and it occurred to me I was in amongst the public, and normally I spend time around my peers who have got the same body of knowledge as I have. Right. And when you go out into the public, you realize how specialist is this knowledge base that you and I and the people on your show are talking about is extremely unique. And you don't really think much about it when you're amongst your peers, but when you go out into the public, you realize you're actually a little bit freaky. And so what I realized from that was I wanted to have something that I could sell to help explain this message to them. And so I wrote a book in a week called What Comes Next. I'm just going to show you that.
Okay.
And the reason it's relevant at the moment is because a week ago I started, or a few days ago, I started the process of basically doing a revision of it. I'm going to bring this up here and I'm going to share the screen. So stand by.
Okay.
Share. That one. Okay, does that work?
Yep, I can see it.
Oh, okay. So what comes next? What comes next? Climate change, the future, and you. So as I started writing this book, I was reading a book by a guy called Joe Romm, who's a climate communicator.
Yeah, no, I know Joe.
Yeah, so this book was great. I can't remember what it's called, but basically it was saying, it's how to write a bestseller or something, or how to write a book that goes viral or something. How to go viral, I think it was called. And so as I was reading this book, I was applying the messages or the learnings of this book into this. And so I made it really short. So this is about 25,000 words. So I tried to compact everything, all of the relevant stuff, like the big picture, into 25,000 words, which means you can read it in about 2 hours. And it's also relatively small physically. And it's written in the first person. So it's as though I am talking to you. So as though, I opened up by saying, imagine that you're looking out the window at some crazy wildfire and all the horses are, getting burned and it's chaotic. And you turn to the person standing next to you and say, why is it burning out of season? Well, I'm literally the guy who can help you understand this. So I'm sort of just like, this is your guide. And what I do in the story is I walk through a little bit about my background and how I come to be your guide. But then I talk about climate change, and specifically I talk about the blue ocean event, this idea that when the Arctic sea ice disappears in the summer, that there will be an uptick in the impacts of climate change. But then I map out 3 scenarios for the future, and I call them drowning, near drowning, and learning to swim. Okay, so drowning is basically an extinction event of the human race, which is my understanding is what happens if we continue business as usual, is that we heat the planet to the point that the positive feedbacks kick in, the temperatures spike, and it kills off us almost first, and then pretty much everything else goes down with it, like a rerun of the Permian extinction. So whether that happens quickly or whether it happens over a longer period. And then the other idea is near drowning, which is sort of the same thing, but it doesn't kill us all off, and we get to stumble through maybe after hundreds or thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of years and reestablish some sort of a global society again. And then the third option, which is the option where I really spend most of my time practicing, is learning to swim. And learning to swim is this idea of our civilization growing up, basically. Our civilization has to grow up and learn how to live on this planet with nature. And so what I do is I drill down into a whole bunch of science papers in a non-academic way, but I sort of refer to these different science papers. And there's 2 of them, for example. There's one came out recently called Gaia 2.0. The concept of Gaia 2.0 is the idea that if you imagine Gaia being the interconnected network of animals and plants that help to self-regulate the conditions on the planet in the benefit of life. Well, when you add humans into there, humans add something to that. They add consciousness, and they can add intent. And we can use nature, can work with nature. We can grow things that weren't there before in order to create certain outcomes. And if we are wise, as our Latin name suggests, Homo sapiens, then we can work with nature in order to overcome the challenges that might come before us. Another idea comes from Adam Frank, who might have been on one of your shows, the astrophysicist.
Yeah, and I haven't interviewed him. Haven't had a conversation yet.
Well, he's got a book called Light of the Stars. And when I read that, that was the missing jigsaw piece for what comes next. And what he says is that if you look at the latest science around exoplanets, then, and you look at the Drake equation, which sort of tries to figure out how many civilizations there are in the universe, he says, now that we know that most stars have got a planet, and you add that figure into the Drake equation, there's probably hundreds of trillions of civilizations in the universe. And he says that they probably all go through an Anthropocene type crisis, because they've all got the same physics. They've probably got photosynthesis. They've probably got fossil fuels. They've probably got societies that rely on those fossil fuels. They probably, don't wake up in time enough. And he says that most of them probably go extinct, but a proportion of them survive. So it's about 25% according to this model. We'll figure it out. And so for me, that's the first time I've seen an appraisal of life on Earth and the challenges of the human race, seen from the outside as opposed from seeing from inside. It's like we're one of 100 trillion planets dealing with this mess. And so that's really valuable. So in the book, basically, I say to people, you got to philosophically prepare yourself that we might simply have already failed. We might have already triggered these tipping points to the point that it's irreversible and our race is going to, it's over, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And if that's not the case, then one of the other options is that we could wake up, learn to swim. And so that's where I focus on my efforts, is how do we implement learning to swim? That's really my life's mission, if you like.
Yeah, that's great. That was a great introduction and overview. And while I probably don't, we'd have to lean into it a little bit more. I probably don't share quite the techno-optimism that I think you have. Nonetheless, I love the way that you paint out, it may be too late. We may have, in fact, triggered certain tipping points that it's out of our control. And if that hasn't happened, well, then here's another possibility, which is as you say, wake up. To my mind, it's interesting. One of the things I have been studying a lot, I think since the last time we talked, because it really just popped in a major way last February when the BBC Futures had a series on deep civilization. I think it was, and it was Luke Kemp wrote an article called "Are We on the Way to Civilizational Collapse?" And he takes a look at 88 civilizations over a 4,000-year period, and shows how long they lasted and what they died of and that sort of thing. And it's interesting. I've come to think, especially in the light of a book that I think you've read. I think I recommended it to you, and I think you actually read it, Teddy Goldsmith's The Way, an Ecological Worldview. I now have a sense that human-centered civilizations, that is where we measure progress, well-being, and success in human-centered ways, knows how it benefits individuals and corporations or nations or whatever, are unsustainable by their very nature. They self-destruct by their very nature. And human-centered technology that doesn't become food at the end of its lifetime, as nature's technology does, is also counterproductive. It just takes time for that to be the case. And so it really requires some kind of life-centeredness. And whether life-centered civilization, life-centered cultures, no problem. We've had those for 95, 98% of human history. But life-centered civilizations, because normally you think of civilization as city-based. And I remember Derek Jensen and I think also William Catton said that, a city is almost by definition a human ecology that has grossly overshot the carrying capacity of its bioregion. So it has to bring resources in. So I wonder about sort of civilizations in other galaxies and what have you, if they would have maintained what we would call an ecological worldview, that is living in a mutually enhancing relationship with everything we depend upon. And once we lose that, once we start thinking it's all about us, we're self-destructive. And I just wonder if other civilizations would have somehow realized that, or if there's something in the nature of technology or, progress traps, the way that, some have written about it. So at any rate, so this is great.
Yeah. And so Adam, one of the points that Adam Frank makes in talking about these, hundreds of trillions of civilizations and just mind mapping what might go on, is that he says that they all probably have something like a climate change problem because of similar, physics, photosynthesis, fossil fuels. He says, but humans are kind of unique. We have this new unique threat called nuclear weapons. He says that's a disposition of the human psyche. He says it needn't necessarily be that way in other places. You might have civilizations that just don't have that warlike thread in them, that suicidal, like the hand grenade inside the brain of a human being, just ready to blow up anything at a moment's notice. I mean, it's unique. Well, who knows whether it's unique? It might be common in all intelligent organisms. So. But the other thing I want to just talk about quickly, because I'd like it to be something of a part of the theming of this conversation, is the idea that when we first talked, if you remember when we first hooked up, I put out that I wrote a blog on LinkedIn, and it was saying that if we're going to have a religion, we should have a religion devoted to Gaia.
Right.
And it was through that you and I started talking. And that's when I started working on this idea. Well, I've been working on that idea consistently for the last 2.5 years. And I want to show you that now and just walk you through a couple of parts of it, because it really is it's like the core of everything that I do is being distilled into this thing.
Well, I look forward to seeing that.
Can you see
right. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So Perium. So the thing that we talked about in 2016 around November, has become Perium.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
So I want to just, and this ties in specifically to what we're just talking about the civilizations that survive, the class 5 planets, as Adam Frank calls them, the planets where the civilizations start to work in unison with the natural biological systems, the Gaia 2.0 model. So I just want to introduce you to this concept called Imperium Vitae Planeta, right? So, and I'll explain how I got there.
Say that again a little bit slower.
Imperium Vitae Planeta. Okay. It's Latin for empire of the living planet.
Okay.
So when we first met, it was because I wrote an article saying we need a religion devoted to Gaia. Well, what I subsequently realized is it's not going to work. In the Australian government, Australian Taxation Office determines a religion to be a belief in a supernatural and the canons of conduct that give effect to that belief. Whereas Gaia isn't supernatural, Gaia is a scientific theory. So it actually it excludes itself, or it's excluded from that definition that I'm using, right? And so I thought, well, Gaia says that all the living things on the planet behave in the manner of a single living organism. Let's tweak that just a little bit. And let's say that all the living things on the planet are a single living organism. So once you tweak it like that, all of a sudden it becomes into the realm of belief, and then it matches the test for a religion.
Well, yeah. Let me just jump in real quick, because I'm realizing now I confused you with somebody else in Cape Town, South Africa, who read Teddy Goldsmith's book, The Way. My hunch is, given your nonverbals, you haven't, and it's a must read. Teddy Goldsmith's book, The Way: An Ecological Worldview, is the result of almost 40 years of his work. He was the publisher and the editor of The Ecologist magazine. For 38 years before he died. And his book, The Way, it really is everything we know about through anthropology about how Gaian, that earth-loving, earth-honoring, where cultures that honored primary reality as primary, as a greater thou, not a lesser it. Mm-hmm. And we actually have quite a lot of evidence of existing sustainable cultures that live on the periphery, but also what's been studied in the last 400 or 500 years. And he articulates just the principles of what I would call Gaian religion. And I would love to, at some future time, because I too have spent the last 3 or 4 years since our first conversation in 2016, I've developed this Pro Future Faith course, which is 8 20-minute sessions that's designed for church and secular study groups. And it's my best articulation to date of Gaian religion. That is a religious orientation. And by religious, I don't mean anything related to the supernatural. You only find that in written cultures. In oral cultures, there's no concept of the supernatural. It doesn't exist. So it's a bias of written cultures, literate cultures, to identify or define religion as belief in supernatural entities. That's crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
Teddy Goldsmith basically defines religion as the control mechanism, and he's using system cybernetics language. What he means is that aspect of culture that insists that the future is not compromised by the present. It ensures accountability to the future. And in healthy cultures and sustainable, stable cultures, that's what Lifeways wasn't called religion. It was Lifeways. That's what it did. It was the moral authority that insisted on accountability to the future. But in unsustainable cultures, especially the last 2,500 years, the axial faiths, what you're looking at is religion kind of downgrades to becoming a coping mechanism, because you're already in an unsustainable culture. You're already in a culture that is on its way to overshoot. And so that religion can't meaningfully impact the political economic spheres. And so it degrades to basically helping people cope in a dysfunctional culture and have great lives and have quality relationships and die peacefully and leave a sweet legacy. But it can't insist on accountability to the future. So I would love to do two things. Actually, I could imagine two calls with you that I would frankly love to have, whether we make them public or not, which is one related to sort of comparing your work in the last several years with my Pro Future Faith course. And I obviously spend time exploring yours. And the other thing is I'd love to have a conversation with you, and I would reread Teddy Goldsmith's book, The Way, because I frankly think you're one of the more important thinkers in this field of life-centered religion or religiosity.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And look, I'll check that out, because a lot of what I'm doing is I'm sort of covering ground that other people have covered. And so obviously I want to find out, I don't want to reinvent the wheel or claim to have created a wheel when it turns out somebody's already invented it. But having said that, I'm sort of just feeling my way through this, just using a natural sort of intuition. I just want to just show you just a couple of points about this concept, particularly where the name comes from. So let me just go back and share this screen.
Well, hang on just a second. I don't know if I want to go down that path quite yet, because the heart and soul of this particular podcast series really is inviting people to share what they think about the concept of post-doom. Does that resonate or not? And then also, like, how have you come to deal with emotionally? I mean, you grew up in the 20th century. I mean, those of us who were born in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, it's like at least 1950s, 60s, 70s and earlier, many of us had a sense of perpetual progress. It was onward and upward. And then at some point we began to get concepts like overshoot, concepts like climate chaos, concepts like abrupt climate chaos, and other things that for many of us, it's an emotional sense of ugh, or oh shit, or oh my God, or whatever. That's what I mean by doom. So I see doom as kind of the midpoint between denial and regeneration. And regeneration is going to happen with or without us. So even if we go extinct, Earth is going to regenerate. That's what life does. But most people keep themselves from going through the stages of grief, maybe, because they see that doom door and they terrified, because this is WASF and they interpret it as we are so fucked. But then if they allow themselves to go through, they realize it also opens up to spheres of gratitude. And one can turn back and look at that same door that you were terrified to go through. And it says, we are so fortunate, WASF. And then it's a whole different place. It's a different heart space, different mind space. You start thinking about possibilities if we don't go extinct. And you ground everything you do and say and think and feel in a life-centered, life-celebrating worldview. So I'm curious, how does the term post-doom land for you? And then what language do you use for these contracting or deteriorating or challenging times?
So when I first came across your use of the word post-doom, it didn't sort of gel with me so well, because of how I had come to use the word doom, and that's through, the Guy McPherson doomerism, which I don't think is a door that you go through, look around and then get optimistic. It's a place where you go to and you stay in one place, which is, WASF. They're so fucked. It's like basically says there's nothing we can do. Like, it's all over, right? And so it's like it's a disempowerment. It's a disempowering place. It's like getting stuck in the mud. Once you're in that headspace, you're not going to join the Extinction Rebellion, because what's the point, right? You're not going to participate.
Yeah, you won't unless you shift out of a human-centered worldview. If you shift to a Gaia-centric or cosmocentric or life-centered worldview, what I call God-centered, G-O-D-D-E. I mean simply life personified, reality personified. But if you shift to a life-centered worldview, actually you can be in the place of accepting that we may go extinct in the next 50 years. We may go extinct in the next 20 years. But nonetheless, you really can come through, and many people have done it, not just myself and Connie, to that place of genuine inspired local action. That's why I define post-doom as the space that opens up when you remember who you are. Like, we are the universe becoming aware of itself. We're not separate from nature. We're not separate from the cosmos. So when you remember who you are and you invest, and you accept what's inevitable, what's genuinely inevitable, and you invest your time and energy in what's pro-future and soul nourishing. And in people, even in the doomosphere, people in, the people who've been in sort of doom for a long time or sort of find themselves there now, if they shift to a life-centered worldview out of a human-centered worldview, it's actually not difficult to get to that post-doom space, at least in my experience.
Okay, so I was looking at your interview with Rupert Reed earlier on, and he answered the question in the way that I was going to answer it, which is that the way that I would use the term, let's put it that way, is to say that you were a doomer, and then you went beyond that, right? So for a while, so for a long time, I'd been reading IPCC reports, and then in 2013, I read Guy McPherson's interpretation of the data. And for about 6 months, I was a doomer. I said, you know what, he's absolutely right. It's all over. There's nothing we can do. It's going to spike. It's all done. But then I realized that you can't tell the future. And so even if there's a slim glint of opportunity to get away from that, then, so that basically, so I'm not a doomer in that sense. I'm a gloomer. All right. And so I'm just going to share my screen just for 2 seconds.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the Gloomer Manifesto. All right.
Okay.
Okay, so what comes next? The book is basically the Gloomer's Bible.
Okay.
Okay, so a gloomer is, it's the difference between a gloomer and a doomer. They're actually very similar in as much as they look at the data and they go, oh, Jesus, I need a drink, right? The difference between the doomer says he's going to keep drinking until he's dead, whereas the gloomer is going to sober up and get to work because he's found an opportunity to maybe make things better. All right. So,
or at least at some scale. That's the thing. It's like when people realize that, yes, we probably can't. In fact, I don't think there's any chance in hell that we can save industrial civilization, but there are profound places we can make a difference at certain scale and size and in locales that are deeply meaningful.
We don't want to save industrial civilization.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Transform it into something else, right?
Yeah.
And this idea of civilizations collapsing. I got that book a while ago. The Collapse of Complex Civilizations, I think.
Yeah, Joseph Tainter. Yeah.
Tainter, yeah. And so as I didn't sit down and read the whole thing. I just sort of skimmed through it. But one of the takeaways I got from it was that this definition of collapse was a rapid decrease in political complexity.
Well, not just political, but yes, exactly.
But that was broadly what he's saying, is that you take something that's kind of big and like that, and then it changes. And so the collapse of a civilization is obviously not going to be fun, but it needn't actually be fatal. Right? It might actually collapse into something better, right? So if you imagine something that's growing evilly, pushing out and just totally destroying everything, that can no longer sustain itself. It collapses down into a local, bioregional economic base with more equitable distribution of goods and services.
Exactly.
So the collapse is not necessarily something to be feared, is what I'm saying.
Exactly.
It's sort of how it collapses and what it collapses into. It has to collapse. It has to collapse because you can't change it from what it is. It has to. One of my subjects recently was change management through my Master of Business. And in change management, they've got this concept called unfreeze. No, it's called freeze, unfreeze, refreeze. So basically you've got an organization which is kind of locked in, it's frozen, right? You can't change it. You need to take it out like an ice cube, right? Like you take the ice cube out and you leave it out in the sun for an hour, it's going to melt. But once it's melted, you can put it in a different pot where it will refreeze into a different form. And so this idea says basically you can't just have the organization, it's ossified, change without it going through some sort of a collapsy, some sort of discombobulation process. And so that has got to happen. And if you actually listen to Steve Bannon and his work and his reading of the fourth turning, and this whole idea about deconstructing the administrative state in America, that's kind of what he was trying to bring about. albeit not for the benefit of ecological sustainability and nice things. But that idea that is that when systems are old enough, they get so tight that you can't change anything. You've got to smash it in order to reform it into something.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful metaphor. I've never heard it before. I really like it because it's first of all it's visual, but also it aligns with. I mean, I have spent a lot of time in the last 6 or 7 years studying the rise and fall and the collapse of civilizations, and I've read probably a dozen, no, maybe not a dozen, 8 or 9 books on the topic, and including the greats, people like Arnold Toynbee and Oswald Spengler and Giambattista Vico. My mentor, Thomas Berry, did his doctoral thesis on Vico back in like 1948, a decade before I was born. But one of the things we do know is that, as you just said, as collapse happens, that's not a bad thing. In fact, from an ecocentric rather than human-centered perspective, it's almost always a good thing. Now, of course, the challenge we now face that previous collapsed civilizations didn't, the 115 or 120 examples that we have, is nuclear. And this is where Guy McPherson talks about, if civilization collapses, not only do you have the global dimming effect, but you've also got a situation where if we can't keep these fuel rods cooled, then you've got an added significant problem. So there's, but I love, I love this freeze. I love this freeze, unfreeze, refreeze, that metaphor.
Yeah. So now here's a couple of important points. On one hand, the collapse of industrial civilization is a very good thing. And you're absolutely right. I've taken an air flight recently. I rebel offset my air flight. But I watched the first three episodes of the miniseries Chernobyl. It's absolutely brilliant. I watched it there and I watched it back. So good. Wow. And in the Chernobyl, it was the inside of the meltdown of the Chernobyl reactor, and there was a couple of things that came out of that. One of which was if the core is allowed to melt down through the restraining concretes, then it goes into the ground. It goes into the groundwater. It contaminates the drinking water of 50 million people. Just the scale of a nuclear disaster. And the other thing was in the story was, as the core was melting down, there was these big pools underneath it. They said when the 2,600 degrees Celsius corium belts through into that water, it's going to superheat the water. It's going to create a thermal explosion, which will be equivalent to around 2 to 4 megatons. And then immediately adjacent to it is 3 other nuclear reactors with a combined something like 1,000 tons of uranium. And so had you had that, then you've got basically a 2 megaton explosion in a nuclear power station. And so you can see just one nuclear power station can contaminate the entire planet.
Yes.
And with enough radioactivity to basically kill off most of life. So McPherson's point around nuclear power stations, I think, is extremely cogent. I think that the global dimming is quite heavily overstated. I think that global dimming is reality. It exists as a phenomena, but there's lots of other things that contribute to the global dimming other than just the power stations and the emissions. And also, we can actually produce a good global dimming through planting forests, because the forests put off certain particles that contribute to that phenomena. And also, in particular, through things like upwelling pumps and actually regrowing ocean pastures by either bringing water up from depth with nutrient and kicking off phytoplankton blooms, or through the iron seeding, as per Ross George et al. So it's possible that if we were to, and this is really important, is that this is a global crisis, and we, as soon as we can get the, we've got today is like this massive wildfire day in Australia.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so I'm not feeling it where I am in this part of the world. The sky's been hazy. There's been big fires north and south, but not where I am. I'm sort of in the middle of a big city, albeit a leafy city. But Sydney is actually under catastrophic fire risk. Wow. And catastrophic means that it's uncontrollable. It's just going to go crazy. And it's because of this drought that's going on. We've got a Pentecostalist Prime Minister called Scott Morrison. And so when he was asked about climate change and the bushfires, his government had cut 35% out of the firefighting budget. Okay, and he says, we offer our hopes and prayers. Well, that is now going around Australia as this major meme of total disconnection. Now remember, he's from Assemblies of God Church,
Yeah.
Horizon Church, and I went just to drill down into, see what they.
I went to an Assemblies of God college. I know it very, very well.
Well, so you can help me understand this. My understanding is, because I was a born again Christian for about 10 months when I was about 17 years old, right? I ran with those guys for a while, and then I ran away, and then a year later I stopped thinking that God was after me. So ever since then I've been okay. But my understanding is that they think that Jesus is coming back, that there's going to be this rapture event, and that following the rapture event, there is going to be this global conflagration, the Armageddon war, and the planet.
No, I'm very very well aware of the profoundly anti-ecological worldview that Pentecostals, most Pentecostals hold.
So the Australian Prime Minister holds that view, and so explains in a way why he cuts the budget from the firefighting and in the face of, because he wants it to happen, right? He wants it to happen. It's prophesied.
Yes, exactly.
Today I've got a friend of mine. I had to drop him off at the surgery anyway, I sat there. I had half an hour to wait, and I wrote something that's been in my head for a long time. And it came out in about 400 words. I'm putting words together, like I like neologisms.
Oh, you do that more than anybody I know, brother.
I know that some of them just don't work, right? But I just flip them out, right? And some of them stay, and some of them fall on the floor, right? But anyway, so I've been working. See, part of the problem is we're in uncharted territory in our civilization right now. We don't have words to describe the things that are happening. Right. In around 2000 and whenever it was, the first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein set fire to the oil fields in Kuwait as his army retreated, there was this incredible photograph, satellite images of half of the planet covered in a veil of black sooty smoke, right? Had they not been able to put those fires out, I mean, some of those fires might simply have not have been put outable, could have just gushed carbon from the ground into flame, into the air. So here's an individual who practices a particular art of killing off all of nature, potentially killing off, taking actions that could have the effect of killing off all of nature. Donald Trump is one of those, pulling out of everything that he's done. He's allowing pesticides, he's opening up drilling, everything. So it's something to do with ecocide. It's something to do with omni, as in killing everything, because if you trigger the rerun of the Permian, everything goes. Mm-hmm. It's something to do with pathy, as in psychopathy, or the participator of an action. And so what I've come up with today is a word that is, I'm going to have to look it up. Look, let me just give us a second. I'll just find it.
Yeah, take your time, because I can edit it so that right after you said that, it shows up.
Okay. Omnicopath.
Omnicopath.
Okay, so it's eco as in ecocide, omni as in all of, and path as in participator in or psychopath. So omnicopath. So we've now got the rise of the omnicopaths. Okay.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is an omnicopath. All right. Putin is an omnicopath, although he's much easier to look at and listen to. He's intelligent, cogent, although he doesn't seem to get his head around the fact that he's an omnicopath. Scott Morrison is an omnicopath, albeit on a smaller scale, but only because he's got a smaller country to destroy, And so, that's an important point, is because now that we've got a word for it, let's say, for example, that's a good word and it fits, and all of a sudden the world goes, aha, I can understand it. Now you can see that person is, or that person isn't, or that person is partaking in those activities through that policy. You know what I'm saying? We don't have a way of actually getting a crowd together to go and drag those people down, in part because we never knew what they were, right? You could say, well, Donald Trump is just a Republican, they're always a bit bent. You could say these different things. But when you put a label on somebody like that, so we can actually now say, okay, we've now got a name for it. We now know what you are. And this is what we do to people like that. Okay.
And you feel that a combination of words like an omnicidal psychopath doesn't work as well, because then you don't have to have people learn a new word.
Well, I mean, it's not up to me which one works, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. It either takes off or it doesn't, right?
Yeah. So I'm just trying to. It needs to be sticky, right? So if you said omnicidal psychopath, that's actually pretty good. I kind of like that, but there's got to be a shorter way of saying it. So maybe there's like a little hierarchy. You can have the full sentence, then the clip, and then the tagline, and then the 2-word version, and then the 1-word version, like a inverse triangle. But we need a name, right? And so that's my name for it. So if that's the best name, great. I'll, you heard it here first. Well, not here first. I put it up on my Facebook page earlier, about 2 hours ago. But yeah. So we don't have.
Well, hang on a second, because somebody watching this, they're going to think your name is David Hoodham, and rather than Guy Lane.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. If you can change that somehow.
I don't know how to change that.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Most likely, this will simply be audio edited and published as a podcast. Connie's very, very picky about what videos she wants to use. So she might want to use this. And if she does, she can easily black it out, and she'd have to put Guy Lane there. So
Guy Lane.
If the video is used, it'll be Guy Lane. Don't worry about it.
Okay, no worries. Okay, that's good. Yeah, so our civilization doesn't have a way of dealing with those people. We don't even know how to identify them. And so I guess that's part of the journey is, there's another thing that's going through my head as well. I went tracking it down the other day. There was a Sinead O'Connor song, and it's called Famine, right? And I it was stuck in my head. I went looking for it a few weeks ago, couldn't find it. Went back last night, finally found it. The song is called Famine, and there is a line in there, and it says, "A US Army regulation says you shouldn't kill more than 10% of a nation because to do so causes permanent psychological suffering." And so I'm thinking to myself, that sort of struck a chord in me because it reminded me of something else. It reminded me of Curtis Lee May bragging about how he had annihilated 20% of the North Korean population with his bombers in the Korean War. He said they ran out of bombing targets. They were hitting wells in rural villages with bombers. And that killing had psychologically scarred the civilization of North Korea. It is buried so deep in their psychology, in their language, in their artwork. And so I guess what I'm thinking in a way is that we need to, if we're gonna have this contraction, and I think we're gonna lose half of the world's population in my lifetime. I'm 50.
I think it's likely to be closer to 90%.
Yeah, well, yeah. So if I were to take a punt, I would say that we're not going to go extinct and we're not going to drown. I think we're going to near drown, and that there's going to be something left. And what I hope is that what's left can go through the troubles and come out and recreate something beautiful, a flourishing of the human condition, right?
Well, I agree, and I'd love to have you read Teddy Goldsmith's The Way, because he articulates better than any other person I've ever read what that reinvention of the human is likely to be, which is it's really like the prodigal species. It's coming back home to what worked for the first 97% of human history, which is so.
Okay, and so a part of that, one thing that we need to take with us through that journey, is we need to take with us a clear sense that there are people who are omnicopaths. We need to take that idea through so that you can see it when it flowers again. Okay. Right? If you can't define it, you can't track it and kill it.
Makes sense.
It's like when you get some people foaming from the mouth, you've got to track down the bacterium. And once you do that, then you can figure out how to treat the symptom. So there's an insight.
Yeah. Well, this is great, Guy. I mean, we're going some directions that I haven't gone with anybody else, and I'm loving it.
Yeah.
So I do want to come back though to really invite you to share your story, your journey. What was your worldview growing up? How did you come to accept the reality of climate and many other, ecological devastating things? And then how was that emotionally for you? Did it happen suddenly? Was it a gradual thing? Like, share your story and take some time doing that.
Yeah. So I think partly the way allows me to be comfortable in this subject matter is that my father worked on Victor bombers. He worked in a Royal Air Force bomber command, and he was airframes fitter in 57 Squadron. And when he was in 57 Squadron, they were maintaining Victor bombers. And The Victor bomber was designed to drop a multi-kiloton nuclear weapon on Russia. That's what it was designed for. It was a big plane. It could travel a long way, had a big bomb bay. And during this Cold War period, they had a multiple of these things stationed around the UK. At any one time, there was 3 sitting at the end of the runway with the engines running on a 3-minute warning, so that within 3 minutes, the pilot could jump in with the coordinates and take off with this bomb on board and go and drop a nuke on Russia. The logic being that as soon as the Russians sent their missiles over, we'd be able to track them. Our plane would be in the air before the missiles came down, which meant that we'd kill them after they killed us. Mutually assured destruction, one of the ground beds of strategic arms control, So I knew about nuclear war. I knew about the idea that we could all be dead in half an hour. I mean, it only takes, 40 minutes to get a nuke from one side of the planet to the other. You could go into the movie cinema on a beautiful day and come out and there's plutonium raining out of the sky and fires everywhere, So I was comfortable with that concept in my teens, Also, my father gave me a copy of a book called Earth Abides. That was a story about a fellow called Isherwood Williams who goes out into the hills in America somewhere researching, gets bitten by a snake, he's delayed by months, and finally when he gets back to civilization, everyone's dead from a pandemic that has swept through and killed everybody off. And so I read that when I was about 13. And so the concept of the human race disappearing off the planet is something that I've had with me before I was even 15 years old. And then when I went into the oil industry and actually saw a machinery of it that wasn't nuclear weapons and it wasn't a pandemic, it was just business as usual. I think that's why I kind of like, wow, there's other ways that this thing can happen.
Yes.
So then I did my environmental science degree and started learning all of the details of it. And then there was a period there, I remember over a year or so, where I spent a lot of time being depressed about what was going through. And that was my grieving. And it was through the grieving, having dealt with the grieving, that then I was able to get into action. And so I've been in action ever since. And so, as I'm saying, as you're agreeing that, we expect to see a massive die-off of the human race. And that's sad in a way, but what's sadder for me is the die-off of the seabirds.
Yes, exactly.
The die-off of the sharks. I had a guy.
The marine mammals and other intelligent species.
Yeah,
that are social intelligent species.
Yeah, and there's these photographs all over the internet now of burnt koalas in Australia. I mean, we've lost our national icon, and so so in a way, it's sort of, to say on one hand you're more sad about the dying seabirds than you are the dying human beings. What sort of a person are you? I guess I'm just a biocentrist person. Yes. I just think that most people just need to wake the fuck up. And if they're not going to wake the fuck up, then they should just walk off the plank and just get it over and done with. If they're going to go anyway or something. Ideally we'd find a way to have people wake up. And so one of the projects that I've been working on, and I keep chipping away at it, I had these little insights, and I've had a few over the last few weeks, is back to this idea of a cacophony. So I had an environmental awakening, and every time I meet an environmentalist, if I talk to them, I ask them, when did it start for you? And it starts at a particular instance. It starts on a project they work on, or it starts from somebody they met, or it's something that they saw where they just got it. They got that they're a part of something bigger, and it changed their thinking and change their behavior. So I'm thinking if we can have mass cacophony, which is when thousands and millions of people get it at once, then all of a sudden we've got the people that we need to do the work that needs to be done. But rather than relying on that to happen, because it doesn't happen naturally, because it hasn't happened yet, how do we foster it? What can we do to people to bring it on? And so I've been sort of working on these things. I used to run this workshop series called Executive Briefing. It was all about sustainability. And I had this thing called the empathy generator. And it was basically, I had these people in this boardroom, which had really good audio visual. And I put this video up. It was basically a video of, you might have seen some underwater footage of these scuba divers at night with all these manta rays swimming around. And this dolphin swims up to this guy and it lifts up its fin and it's got a hook stuck in it. And the guy operates on the dolphin to get the hook out, right? Okay, and then there's another bit of footage where the scuba divers have come across a whale shark with this huge, great big bit of rope, dug into its skin and they cut it off. And so we've got this video footage, and it opens up by saying, we've changed the world. And it ends by saying, let's change it again. And the music is Jeff Buckley's Lilac Wine. Anyway, so when you put that together, it's highly emotive. And what we're trying to do is just to create empathy in people.
Yes.
So that was the first attempt of that. And I haven't really worked on it much since, but mapped it out. But I learned recently about a thing called 4D cinema, which is where you actually sit in the chair and the chair moves and it sprays different smells in you. And you can like physically manipulate people while they got the AV around them. And you can actually get a mobile cinema with 4D seats in it, which is 4D. And so the idea was to actually create some sort of a show, maybe it runs for 30 minutes, and just frighten the bejesus out of people, give them an emotional shock, right? And if you imagine a bell curve that you put 50 people in there, one person's going to go, "Pah, didn't touch me, nothing happened, mate." But on the other hand, somebody physically defecated themselves or freaked out or went in, you know what I'm saying? If you tune it up so that you get one person that needs hospitalization, you probably know that most of the people have got something big out of it. And maybe there's a way of actually bringing people into an auditorium for 40 minutes or 20 minutes, and they walk out and they go, "Fuck it, where's the Extinction Rebellion sign up?"
Yeah.
Right? Because at the moment, we've got 90% of the public are asleep at the wheel and they're voting.
No, exactly. Well, it's interesting because I've had similar thoughts in the sense of, is there a way of having people have a genuine, what I would call ecological epiphany, what you're calling epiphany, or however you put that together.
Yeah.
But and what I haven't found anything more elegant. I mean, David McConville is this amazing guy who does these planetariums that bring people to tears. I mean, I've been to some of the great planetariums in the United States. And they're awesome, but they don't bring you to tears. But David McConville's shows bring you to tears.
Okay.
I was in one in Denver where, I mean, you could hear, 250 people, probably 175 of them were in tears. It was just amazing. But other than that, what I've been trying to do is, get people to read. I've simply been trying to get people to read William Catton's book Overshoot, because almost everybody that reads Overshoot has a life-changing experience in terms of their ecological worldview. But only so many people are going to do that. It's not an efficient way of generating large-scale emotional transformation or really repentance and conversion. Like, oh my God, I'm never the same kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, look, and ultimately, the question is whether, one thing for me, I've got all these ideas, but I'm always constrained. I don't have resources. I don't have like a rich uncle or any pot of gold I can dip into. So I come up with these ideas and I write them down. I put up a website, share it on a Facebook group with 600 people. I get 2 likes and a share, and that's the end of that. And I go off and create the next one. So I've got this great big pile of innovation, but I don't have a team of executives to put them into place and a funding mechanism and a CFO and all the rest of it. But I'm sure that not just me. I mean, we've got 7.5 billion people on this planet. It's a big, complicated system. We need hundreds of innovators testing hundreds of innovations. I mentioned before about the upwelling pump. So I've talked to Brian von Hersen, who's the guy behind that, and he's doing some fantastic work. But there's only one of him. Yeah. There should be 100 of him. And so this, and just come back to this for a moment. So in a way, you've got this huge dam of ideas and talent and concepts and technologies and the electric vehicles and the solar panel, but none of it's been fully and properly deployed because we've got this omnicopaths stopping us from deploying this stuff. And this is where the Extinction Rebellion comes in. Is that the Extinction Rebellion, if you imagine that you've got an army amassed around a castle, and every time you get the electric car guy managed to sneak in and jump over the wall, somebody stabs him and throws him back out again, right? So the Extinction Rebellion is basically like a battering ram that brings down the walls that allows all of those good ideas to come in and take hold within the castle. And so I've just transitioned onto the Extinction Rebellion. But in order to answer your question about my journey, is that because I've always tried to focus on looking for the opportunities of learning to swim, then when I find them, and because I'm behind TP, I like drill down and get my head around it. And the Extinction Rebellion is by far the best thing that I have seen as the tool that we need to fix the problem. Okay. You know, you could say, oh, well, there's, you know, the Extinction Rebellion, but there's also, you know, solar panels. I said, yeah, but you don't get your solar panels unless the Extinction Rebellion works. The Extinction Rebellion, if it's successful, forces governments to rapidly decarbonize and open up to ecological transition. And so the trip that I did where I was watching the Chernobyl movie, I went to the UK to participate in their November uprising in London. I was there for 4 weeks, but the first 2 weeks was Extinction Rebellion actions. And I watched hundreds and hundreds of people sit in the road, get arrested, go into prison for the, you know, overnight. It's quite funny. In the second week, the government put a Section 14 across the whole of London, effectively banning Extinction Rebellion actions anywhere in London. Arrested another 1,000 people under that rule. And then 4 weeks later, the High Court said that it was illegal. So now the Extinction Rebellion is able to sue the British Metropolitan Police. Fascinating, fascinating stuff.
Wow.
So look, I've sort of come through different things that I've done, and I will just continually sort of work on what seems to be the pointy part of the spear, particularly the parts that I can contribute where other people aren't contributing. I'm not one to get at the back of the queue and to sort of, you know, be a part of something that other people are, because they're already doing that. I'm going to go and find something that's not been done. Yeah. And this is where Perium comes in, the idea of creating a religion devoted to the living planet, to actually try and flesh that out. You know, and ultimately, if there were resources, then I could say, well, there's some resources. Let's kick that off. Let's put some money into marketing it. Let's see what we can do with that. Let's set it up as its own independent organization. And then I can get off and go and invent something else, because that's my strong suit, is inventing things, I think, you know.
Well, you are amazing. You've got more energy. I mean, you're actually one of the people. I mean, I consider myself one of the most energetic people that I know, and most people who know me feel that. And I definitely relate to you as a peer, perhaps a teacher, perhaps somebody who's gone beyond where I can.
An energizer bunny, they call it.
Yeah, there you go. I know. Well, Guy, I want to sort of begin winding down, and I want to ask you what has been particularly helpful or inspiring or supportive for you, both emotionally and intellectually, but especially emotionally, in these crazy times in which we live, these contracting, collapsing times. I mean, as I think I probably shared with you the first time we talked, and who knows, maybe that was the only time, although for some reason I have a memory of a second time just a year and a half ago. But in any case, my worldview has been so shaped by William Catton's book Overshoot and his distinction between problems, which can be potentially solved, and predicaments, which have to be adapted to, lived with, evolved with, and that sort of thing. And so one of the most sobering things that I learned in the last 7 years of studying, especially the rise and fall of civilizations, is it turns out that in the vast majority of cases, in the contracting decades, sometimes a century or two, of a civilization, there tend to be some very predictable responses that are so common, it's almost, part of our nature, that there are those who deny it, that basically say, they go to their grave essentially saying, there's no problem here, it's still getting better, the prophets of progress, and they just can't see it or won't see it. They just can't emotionally allow themselves to understand contraction and collapse over time. But there's also a whole host of people that believe, if we all just did this or voted this way or had this transformation of thinking or in some way, adopted this new religion or whatever, then these large scale systems can transform. And it turns out that both the optimists and the people who are just deeply, heartfully committed to like large scale transformation, it seems that those are the two least likely. They almost never happen, if ever. And that doesn't mean that I don't absolutely applaud and say yes for those who have a vision of transformation at whatever scale. But it was really sobering for me to learn over time that that's a very, very common response, and we're certainly seeing that now. And so I encourage people to act as they can, to follow their bliss, to follow where their joy and the world's needs or the future's needs intersect, and to make as big a difference as they can from a place of generosity and compassion, not fear. Because ultimately, if you put your faith, your trust in life, in evolution, I mean, my faith is in evolution. My faith is in ecology. Ecology is the heart of my theology. in fact, I could say ecology is my theology. And so my faith is in ecology. It's in life as it is. And that allows me to be engaged very much as an activist of various sorts, but not from the place of trying to save industrialism, as we talked about before, but from the place of doing everything I can to plant seeds for healthy, ecocentric, life-centered culture and humanity and religiosity, so that when, as John Michael Greer talks about, the rubble stops bouncing, that if humans survive this bottleneck, they learn to swim, in your analogy.
Yeah, I guess what keeps me philosophically or spiritually alive, I guess, is I like it. The evolution. You know, the Permian extinction knocked off 90% of all the different species on the planet, and 250 million years later, here we are, the most biodiverse we've ever been. And so, at the heart of all of the madness of human enterprise, at the very heart of all of that, the core of that, is this living organism. You know, well, you're referring to Gaia. So I've gone past my Gaia phase, right? So I don't refer to Gaia anymore. I refer to Perium, right? So Perium. Now, let me explain where that name came from, because it is important to this, because it's the core of my worldview is invested in Perium. Everything I do is going to find its way out through Perium, right? So why is it called Perium? So as I went through this thought process of you can't have a religion based on Gaia, because Gaia is a scientific theory, if we're using the ATO's, the Taxation Office definition, which is a supernatural. So then if all the living things on the planet are a single living organism, what's its taxonomic classification? What's its species name? So I went through this thought process, and I'll just share my screen again just very briefly to show you this. Stand by. Okay, so on this page, if you scroll down to the bottom, down here, there is an article that I wrote called "The Empire of Life Needs a Proper Name." And basically what I did was I went through this thought exercise that said, well, how do we name species? We've got you've got the tree of life and all of the kingdoms and domains and all the rest of it. But you've got a binomial, which is a genus name and a species name. And that's how things are known. Homo sapiens, Canis, Carcharodon, Carcharias. So what was the binomial for the living planet? So that's where I went through this process and identified this name, Perium Vitae Planeta. So Perium basically means empire, right? Yep. And Vitae Planeta means living planet. So basically what I came up with is that the living organism, that is the living planet, is basically called the Empire of the Living Planet, or Perium Vitae Planeta. And so I'm starting to create these ceremonies that celebrate Perium. Now, Perium, if you actually go and do your Roman, as opposed to your sort of Latin, Perium is a designation to somebody who has an authority to act militarily on behalf of the state, militarily or politically. Okay, so when somebody has Perium, they have been given the authority to act on behalf of the state. And so the word Perium in this instance not only means the empire, as in the totality of everything, it also means, it sort of implies that we have authority to act on behalf of the empire. And so when you start to think through this frame and start to put it into sort of like a worldview, you start to see, well, if all the living things on the planet are a single living organism, that means that you and I are cells in a living organism. Yeah. And cells have common attributes, like we exchange gases and so forth, but we also have differentiated roles. So I refer to the common duties as earthity. We should live with earthity, which is to say that we should be good neighbors to fellow humans and to fellow animals and plants. But we should also have a Perium mission, which is a Perium mission, our specific mission. So my mission is to invent new words and concepts and try and share them, write a few books and do YouTube videos and have conversations. So I'm living my Perium mission, as are you.
Yes, okay? Indeed.
And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a whole new kind of structure, which has got enough elements that interconnect together in a logical and yet spiritually rich way that people can come into it. And eventually there will be like a commune for it. And eventually there'll be a multiple of communes. And so I'm working on an idea called the Periampus, right? The Perium campus. And it's sort of basically a place, a piece of land somewhere where these ideas are turned into reality. So I'm going to have permaculture gardens, passive solar design. It's going to have, you know, organic food. It's going to have a whole bunch of stuff open to the public. It's going to be based on little micro eco enterprises, open to the public, bring some money in. And it's basically the idea is to create an ecological and social refugium from collapse, a network of them. So that if you're living in the Periampus up in the Sunshine Coast and a Category 5 hurricane knocks it out, you've got reciprocal rights to the one on the coast further down that didn't get hit. And so to try and create this alternative little space, but not based around all of the existing cultural frames of capitalism and Christianity and all that, you know, all that stuff, but to actually go and reinvent it from scratch based on some first principles. And the first principle being that we're all part of the living planet.
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that I've been doing over the last 3 years, and if I can, I'll just share this very quickly because it's kind of fun, is I learned a while ago that New Year is basically, the reason why we have New Year on the 1st of January is because it's timed with the circumcision of Christ, right? It ties in with an ancient ceremony for the circumcision of Christ. And so when I realized that New Year was Foreskin Day, I'm like, I am not, because a new year is an arbitrary day after all, isn't it? We're at the beginning and end of a circle. It's arbitrary, right? There's, you know, the Chinese a new year and the Persian new year. So I thought I'm going to have my own new year. So my new year, okay, and I call it Earth New Year, is on the 16th of July.
And give me the logic.
Okay. Well, what happened on the 16th of July? I'm gonna share screen again. Come on, you should know this.
I don't know. I have no idea.
American. You're complicit. You're complicit. So 16th of July was the Trinity bomb test.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So the 16th of July was when they let off the gadget in the New Mexico desert, the first nuclear atmospheric bomb test, right? The first contamination of the atmosphere by plutonium and uranium, right? The beginning of the Anthropocene epoch. So this is basically a de facto date for the beginning of the Anthropocene epoch. And so for the last 3 years in a row, I've been holding these events where I actually set off. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, so I set off a little device. Just stand by a second.
Okay, I'm seeing.
So this happens at 9:29 p.m. on the 16th of July. Okay. So it's called a CO2 bomb. It's got dry ice and water in a plastic bottle in a bucket of water, and then when it goes off at night behind this white light. This one's better. What's this?
Oh wow! Wow.
So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a new cultural ceremonies that, rather than tie in with Christianity and the monarchy. So if you look at most of the for example, public holidays in Australia, they're tied to capitalism, the monarchy, and Christianity, right? So you've got Christmas and New Year is a Christian celebration. Let's face it, it's Foreskin Day. Okay, we've got Easter, right? So that's 3 of them. You've got Queen's birthday. You've got Labor Day, which ties in with capitalism, and you know. And so I'm trying to create something other than that. I'm not going to oppose that, right? And so that's what I'm trying to do, based around the central principle that we're all part of the living planet. And so that's the work that I'm doing. And all of those things together meet the technical definition of a religion.
Yeah.
In as much as it's based on a supernatural practices and so forth. So, and I'm not calling it a religion here per se, because most people, when I use that term, are offended by it, but it doesn't change what it is, right? So that's what I get up to.
I mean, you embody, more than almost anybody else that I know, a maxim that an old mentor of mine said: if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. And you are clearly having fun, even and what I so appreciate and what I so resonate is that I am too. I mean, I day to day, I mean, I have periods of grief, I have periods of sadness, I have periods of depression, but they don't last long. And 95% of every day, of 95% of every week, and 95% of every month, I'm in a pretty joyous, on purpose, and I love life and love the grace that I get to do what I get to do at this time. And I'm very present to the possibility, well, not the possibility, the inevitability of the extinction of Homo colossus. That's Catton's term. Homo colossus, the extinction of that is inevitable, and to be encouraged. The possibility of Homo sapiens going extinct, and yet also what I'm committed to is that should some remnant of humanity survive, the seeds have been planted for healthy humanity, in love with life again, in right relationship to reality, which as you know, I use the word reality and God interchangeably, but I've stopped spelling God, G-O-D, and spelling it now G-O-D-D-E, because it sounds the same, God, but it's the Old English spelling. That's how God was spelt in Old English, but it's gender neutral. And what I mean is, and what those of us, there are a lot of Catholic nuns and some pagans have used it, because what we mean by God, G-O-D-D-E, is reality with a personality, not a person outside reality, and like life personified. Life as a person, like Uncle Sam as a personification of the U.S. government. Well, God, G-O-D-D-E, is a personification of life. Reality as a whole. So it's interesting. You and I are doing such, I'm reminded of the old phrase or the statement that all models are false, some are useful. And you and I are creating two very different models, but they seem to be in the same direction, which is helping people, inviting people, encouraging people to fall deeply in love with life and to do whatever they can to be pro-future. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. Definitely on the same, heading in the same direction there.
Well, this is great, Guy. Any final things that you'd like to say? Make sure people know, where to go to learn more about your stuff. But this has been very fun.
Yeah. I'll just go back to, I'll just share the screen again for a second just to answer that question. So the two places where you'll find my stuff is Perium. So that's perium.org. That's that one there. It can go. There's the new project I'm working on called the Rebel Offset, which is basically so it's a carbon offset scheme that when you pay the money to carbon offset your air travel, part of the fee goes to pay the fines of the Extinction Rebel people that get arrested for climate activism.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So the first one we've got, so this is Cara. So she got arrested in Brisbane in August for road blocking for climate action. And so we've paid her fine of $275. So paid through people carbon offsetting their flights, right? So when you get the Rebel Offset, I buy and retire the carbon credits, as is the norm, but we get these inexpensive ones. And then the body of the money goes into paying the rebels. And this is my friend here, Tarek, who's got $625 of fines. That's him being arrested there with this wall of muscle around him. He's a 7 foot tall philosopher. Who got arrested for blocking a road in a climate action. He's not impressed. You can see that grumpy look on his face. Anyway, so we're going to help him with his fine, but we need people that fly to buy the Rebel Offset.
Well, I can't support that one because Connie never flies anymore, and I try to fly as little as possible. But if you're going to fly, this sounds like a really good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and then the other place you'll find my stuff is theguyLane.com. So this is basically where everything comes in here and links out to other things.
That's great.
And this is where I've got my books, and my fiction books are here, and links to Perium and other things and a whole bunch of interviews. So that's really how you'll find me, through Perium and through GuyLane.com.
Fabulous.
Thanks for the opportunity to share that.
Well, thank you for sharing it. Thanks for doing that. I mean, it's interesting because now this is the first time I've had one of my guests share screen save, and that was really quite good and effective. So if Connie uses if the video is used for anything, that'll be really useful. But still, even in the audio editing, I'll make sure that people access that.
All right.
Wow. Well, Guy, thank you so much. Just a deep bow of gratitude to you, your work, your passion, your joy, but mostly your pro-future commitment, your passionate pro-future commitment. And also looking very realistically. You're not Pollyanna. You're not, you recognize that, we could be done. We just don't know, but let's act as if there's a possibility that some of us will survive and then do what we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for what you do.
Great.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, brother.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.